frente a ellos tenemos que demostrar una capacidad de acción mucho más poderosa, mucho más consistente y mucho más unida que la que hemos sido capaces de hacer hasta ahora. Hemos hecho mucho y hemos sin duda asombrado al mundo y sorprendido a Putin con una capacidad de reacción rápida y unida. Hay que seguir en este camino. Y este acto, este momento parlamentario, donde ustedes con sus aplausos quieren dar ánimos a las instituciones europeas para seguir en el camino que hemos emprendido, puede ser el momento en que los europeos entiendan que el mundo en el que viven es un mundo peligroso y para hacerle frente hace falta que refuercen su unión. La pandemia abrió la puerta a acciones innovadoras. La pandemia nos ha impulsado por el camino de unirnos más para hacer frente a los virus. Este momento trágico debe impulsarnos a unirnos más para hacer frente a aquellas acciones humanas que amenazan también la vida, la seguridad y la prosperidad de todos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, High Representative. I now give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, for her statement.
Madam President of the European Parliament, Mr. President of the Council, High Representative, Mr. President of the Ukraine, dear Volodymyr, Mr. Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, my honourable members, war has returned to Europe. Almost 30 years after the Balkan Wars and over half a century after Soviet troops marched into Prague and Budapest, civil defence sirens again went off in the heart of a European capital. Thousands of people fleeing from bombs camped in underground stations, holding hands, crying silently, trying to cheer each other up. Cars lined up towards Ukrainian western borders. And when many of them ran out of fuel, people picked up their children and their backpacks and marched for tens of kilometers towards our union. They sought refuge inside our borders because their country wasn't safe any longer. Because inside Ukraine, a gruesome death count has begun. Men, women, children are dying once again because a foreign leader, President Putin, decided that their country, Ukraine, has no right to exist. And we will never, ever let that happen and never, ever accept that. Honourable members, this is a moment of truth for Europe. And let me quote the editorial of one Ukrainian newspaper, the Kyiv Independent, published just hours before the invasion began, and I quote, "This is not just about Ukraine. It's a clash of two worlds, two polar set of values." End of quote. They are so right. This is a clash between the rule of law and the rule of the gun, between democracies and autocracies, between a rules-based order and a world of naked aggression. How we respond today to what Russia is doing will determine the future of the international system. The destiny of Ukraine is at stake, but our own fate also lies in the balance. We must show the power that lies in our democracies. We must show the power of people that choose their independent path freely and democratically. This is our show of force. And today, a union of almost 500 million people has mobilized for Ukraine. The people of Europe are demonstrating in front of Russian embassies all across our union. Many of them have opened their homes to Ukrainians fleeing from Putin's bombs. And let me thank especially Poland, Romania, Slovakia and Hungary for welcoming these women, men and children. Europe will be there for them, not only in the first days, but also in the weeks and months to come. That must be our promise altogether. And this is why we are proposing to activate the temporary protection mechanism to provide them with a secure status and access to schools, medical care and work. They deserve it. We need to do that now. And we know this is only the beginning. More Ukrainians will need our protection and solidarity. We are and we will be there for them. Our union is showing a unity of purpose that makes me proud. At the speed of light, the European Union has adopted 3 waves of heavy sanctions against Russia's financial system, its high-tech industries and its corrupt elite. And this is the largest sanctions package in our union's history. We do not take these measures lightly, but we feel we had to act. These sanctions will take a heavy toll on the Russian economy and on the Kremlin. We are disconnecting key Russian banks from the SWIFT network. We also banned the transaction of Russia's central bank, the single most important financial institution in Russia, and this paralyzes billions of foreign reserves, turning off the tap on Russia's and Putin's war. We have to end this financing of his war. And second, we target important sectors of the Russian economy. We are making it impossible for Russia to upgrade its oil refineries, to repair and modernize its air fleet, and to access many important technologies it needs to build a prosperous future. We've closed our skies to Russian aircraft, including the private jets of oligarchs. And make no mistake, we will freeze their other assets as well, be it yachts or fancy cars or luxury prosperities. We'll freeze that all together. And thirdly, in another unprecedented step, we're suspending the licenses of the Kremlin's propaganda machine. The state-owned Russia Today and Sputnik and all of their subsidiaries will no longer be able to spread their lies to justify Putin's war and to divide our union. And these are unprecedented actions by the European Union and our partners in response of an unprecedented aggression by Russia. Each one of these steps has been closely coordinated with our partners and allies. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada and Norway, but also, for example, Japan, South Korea and Australia. All of these days you see that more than 30 countries representing well over half of the world's economy have also announced sanctions and export controls on Russia. And if Putin was seeking to divide the European Union, to weaken NATO and to break the international community, he has achieved exactly the opposite. We are more united than ever, and we will stand up in this war. That is for clear that we will overcome and we will prevail. We are united and we stay united. Honourable members, I am well aware that these sanctions will come at a cost for our economy too. I know this, and I want to speak honestly to the people of Europe. We have endured 2 years of pandemic, and we all wished that we could focus on our economic and social recovery. But I believe the people of Europe understand very well that we must stand up against this cruel aggression. Yes, protecting our liberty comes at a price, but this is a defining moment, and this is the cost we are willing to pay, because freedom is priceless, honourable members. This is our principle. Freedom is priceless. Our investments today will make us more independent tomorrow. And I'm thinking first and foremost about our energy security. We simply cannot rely so much on a supplier that explicitly threatens us. And this is why we reached out to other global suppliers, and they responded. Norway is stepping up. In January, we had the record supply of LNG gas. We're building new LNG terminals and working on interconnectors. But in the long run, it is our switch to renewables and hydrogen that will make us truly independent. We have to accelerate the green transition, because every kilowatt hour of electricity Europe generates from solar, wind, hydropower or biomass reduces our dependency on Russian gas and other energy sources. This is a strategic investment. And my honourable members, this is a strategic investment because on top, less dependency on Russian gas and other fossil fuel sources also means less money for the Kremlin's war chest. This is also a truth. We are resolute. Europe can rise up to the challenge. The same is true on defence. European security and defence has evolved more in the last 6 days than in the last 2 decades. Most member states have promised deliveries of military equipment to Ukraine. Germany announced that it will meet the 2% goal of NATO as soon as possible. And our union, for the first time ever, is using the European budget to purchase and deliver military equipment to a country that is under attack. 500 million euros for the European Peace Facility to support Ukraine's defence. As a first batch, we will now also match this by at least 500 million euro from the EU budget to deal with the humanitarian consequences of this tragic war, both in the country and for the refugees. Honourable members, this is a watershed moment for our union. We cannot take our security and the protection of people for granted. We have to stand up for it. We have to invest in it. We have to carry our fair share of the responsibility. And this crisis is changing Europe. But Russia has also reached a crossroad. The actions of the Kremlin are severely damaging the long-term interests of Russia and its people. More and more Russians understand this as well. They are marching for peace and freedom. And how does the Kremlin respond to this? By arresting thousands of them. But ultimately, the longing for peace and freedom cannot be silenced. There is another Russia besides Putin's tanks, and we extend our hand of friendship to this other Russia. Be assured they have our support. Honourable members, in these days, independent Ukraine is facing its darkest hour. At the same time, the Ukrainian people are holding up the torch of freedom for all of us. They are showing immense courage. They are defending their lives. But they are also fighting for universal values, and they are willing to die for them. President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people are a true inspiration. And when we last spoke, he told me again about his people's dream to join our union. Today, the European Union and Ukraine are already closer than ever before. There is still a long path ahead. We have to end this war, and we should talk about the next steps. But I am sure nobody in this hemicycle can doubt that a people that stands up so bravely for our European values belongs in our European family. And therefore, honourable members, I say, long live Europe and long live a free and independent Ukraine. Me z vami, slava Ukrainie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. We now move to the speakers on behalf of the political groups, starting with Manfred Weber for the EPP Group.
Der 24. Februar ist eine tiefe Zäsur in Europa und in der Welt. Krieg ist zurück in Europa. Und jedes Wort, jede Rede, die man hält, wirkt klein angesichts der Leistungen, die die Ukrainer und Ukrainerinnen jetzt vollbringen. Und deswegen steht zunächst die Bewunderung im Mittelpunkt für die Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainer, ihren Präsidenten Zelensky an der Spitze, für ihre Standhaftigkeit, für ihre Freiheitsliebe, für ihren Mut, für ihre Entschlossenheit. Sie sind die heutigen Helden unseres European Way of Life. Der 24. Februar ist ein Freiheitstag für Europa. Von Dublin bis Athen, von Lissabon bis nach Riga. Das gleiche Gefühl. Einerseits der Schock, das Entsetzen über die Brutalität des russischen Angriffs und andererseits die Bewunderung und die Solidarität mit den Menschen in der Ukraine. Sie kämpfen für uns, für unsere Werte. Diese Tage, dieser Kiew-Moment des 24. Februars macht uns alle zu Europäern. Dieser Kiew-Moment zwingt uns jetzt auch zu klaren Antworten. Wenn Präsident Zelensky uns fragt, sind wir willkommen? Dürfen wir Mitglied der Europäischen Union werden? Gehören wir dazu? Dann sage ich im Namen der größten Partei Europas, ja, ihr seid willkommen. Ja, ihr gehört zur Europäischen Union. Ihr seid unsere Freunde. Der Kiew-Moment zwingt uns auch, die Alternativen aufzuzeigen. Putin ist der brutale Aggressor. Er steht für das Gegenteil, von dem wir überzeugt sind, nämlich für Nationalismus, für Autokratie, das Ablehnen aller Rechtsstaatlichkeit, das dumpfe Denken in imperialen Einflusszonen. Sein Denken ist das glatte Gegenteil von uns. Einem Europa, das Grenzen überwinden will, Nationalismus besiegen will, Respekt gegenüber jedem und jeder zeigt, die Verteidigung des Rechtsstaats, der Demokratie und der Freiheit im Blick hat. Der Kiew-Moment bedeutet aber auch, dass wir ehrlich zu uns selbst sind. Nämlich deutlich machen, dass wir jetzt handeln müssen. Mit den Sanktionen wurde ein beispielloses Paket geschnürt. Ich möchte allen Beteiligten herzlich für die Arbeit der letzten Stunden und Tage danken. Wir als größte Fraktion unterstützen diese Maßnahmen. Aber eines ist auch klar, noch vor wenigen Tagen, vor einer Woche, war davon nicht so stark die Rede. Einzelne haben sogar abgelehnt, über Nord Stream 2 als Sanktionsmöglichkeit zu sprechen. Wir waren nicht entschieden genug in der Vorbereitung der Schritte, die jetzt Putin gewählt hat. Das heißt für uns heute, wir müssen handlungsfähiger werden, unsere Naivität ablegen und endlich die Einstimmigkeit in der Außenpolitik abschaffen. Der Kiew-Moment bedeutet auch eine starke NATO, aber auch einen starken europäischen Pfeiler aufzubauen. Die EVP hat letzte Woche NATO-Truppen in Litauen besucht. Ich habe dann den niederländischen Kommandeur gefragt, was ist Ihr größter Wunsch an die Politik? Und seine Antwort war, wir verbringen 50% unserer Zeit damit, die technischen Standards bei Funkgeräten, Technik, bei der Munition zu koordinieren. Schafft endlich gemeinsame europäische Strukturen. Das war die Bitte der Soldaten, die im Moment die Freiheit Europas verteidigen. Der Kiew-Moment bedeutet, Europa muss jetzt auch groß denken. Und deswegen bitte ich, müssen wir die Konferenz für die Zukunft Europas neu denken. Der Bürgerdialog ist abgeschlossen. Wir haben die Rückmeldungen. Jetzt ist es der richtige Zeitpunkt, diese Konferenz zum echten Platz zu machen, wo wir über die Zukunft Europas entscheiden, den Mut haben, diese Schritte gemeinsam zu gehen. Wann, wenn nicht jetzt? Und der Kiew-Moment zeigt auch, dass wir die Politikbereiche auf den Prüfstand stellen müssen, die wir hier im Parlament zu diskutieren haben. Die Energiepolitik, bereits angesprochen von Ursula von der Leyen. Die EU muss den Green Deal beschleunigen und neue internationale Partnerschaften sowie Energiehandelsverträge abschließen. Und der Kiew-Moment bedeutet für uns, wir sind mit den USA in einer Schicksalsgemeinschaft verbunden. Gerade mit Joe Biden müssen wir jetzt dieses Momentum nutzen. Gerade jetzt zeigt sich, wie wichtig eine geschlossene Wirtschaftsunion, eine Wirtschaftsmacht für Freiheit und Demokratie ist. Und deswegen wollen wir ein neues TTIP, ein neues Handelsabkommen mit den Amerikanern aufbauen, damit wir noch enger zusammenstehen. Es ist der richtige Zeit, mit diesem Kiew-Moment die Weiterentwicklung Europas anzugehen. Es beginnt eine neue Zeit. Wir brauchen einen langen Atem, Aber die Freiheit und der European Way of Life sind es wert. Denn Freiheit hat kein Preisschild. Den Preis der Freiheit zahlt man erst, wenn man sie verliert. Das beweisen uns die mutigen Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainer. Wir stehen an eurer Seite.
Thank you, President Weber. I now give the floor on behalf of the S&D Group to Irache Garcia Perez.
Señora presidenta, la guerra de Putin contra Ucrania marca el inicio de una nueva etapa en Europa y en el mundo. En tiempos históricos necesitamos decisiones históricas. El apoyo financiero y militar a Ucrania, la desconexión de los principales bancos rusos de la plataforma SWIFT, la activación de la Directiva de Protección Internacional para ayudar a los refugiados ucranianos y la prohibición de la maquinaria mediática del Kremlin suponen un salto cualitativo a nuestra capacidad de respuesta. Las democracias occidentales hemos logrado una admirable unidad para hacer frente a este desafío y es fundamental que mantengamos la unidad ante los graves retos que tendremos que seguir afrontando. Los 4 paquetes de sanciones liderados por el señor Borrell son un primer paso de una larga crisis que planteará nuevos dilemas, entre ellos cómo seguir apoyando a Ucrania o cómo reaccionar a probables represalias rusas. La unidad requiere valor y sacrificio. Solo con valor y sacrificio alcanzaremos la autonomía energética para doblegar a Putin. Nuestro compromiso irrenunciable con un orden energético mundial cimentado en las energías renovables a largo plazo debe complementarse con la creación de reservas estratégicas de gas a corto plazo. Y también necesitamos valor y sacrificio para acoger a todos los refugiados que huyen de la guerra con un esfuerzo de responsabilidad compartida. El cobarde ataque de Putin muestra su verdadero temor, la democracia. Una exitosa transición democrática en Ucrania debe servir de inspiración a quienes valientemente hoy también han salido a las calles en Rusia. La lucha por la paz y la libertad de los pueblos ruso y ucranio requiere nuestro compromiso. No descansaremos hasta conseguir que Putin sea juzgado como criminal de guerra por el Tribunal Penal Internacional. La agresión de Putin también desenmascara a sus cómplices de extrema derecha y a un modelo de convivencia que reprime opositores, censura a medios de comunicación y niega derechos individuales. A esta hora, en las ciudades y en los pueblos de Ucrania, no solo están en juego la seguridad y la integridad territorial de este país, sino también el mundo en el que queremos vivir. Puede ser uno democrático, apoyado en derecho internacional, la diplomacia y los derechos humanos. O puede ser otro, fundado en la fuerza bruta, en las esferas de influencia y en la violación de los derechos que deben de ser universales. Ningún tirano nos hará renunciar a nuestro deseo de forjar alianzas en torno a un proyecto de paz que protege la soberanía de las naciones, el progreso y la libertad de los pueblos y la integridad de la
Let me just conclude with a personal comment. I'm proud of Europe, the Europe of today, the Europe that does not resign itself to what's going on, Europe that looks back to learn from history, but above all looks forward to defend what we hold most precious, democracy and peace. Thank you.
I now give the floor on behalf of the Renew Europe Group to Stéphane Séjourné.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Madam
Madame la
President,
Présidente, Monsieur le Haut Représentant, chers collègues.
High Representative.
Je souhaite commencer par saluer le courage des hommes et des femmes ukrainiennes et ukrainiens qui se battent non seulement pour leur patrie, mais pour leur droit à choisir leur destin.
Choose their own destiny. President Zelensky and the President of the Ukrainian Parliament
You are heroes of democracy. The European Parliament today has shown it is a strong ally of the Ukrainian people. Europe is a shield that protects its democracy and freedoms for all the peoples of Europe. Of all the decisions taken this week, let me just say you have the absolute support of our political group. There is huge work that has been done by the European institutions in order to put in place and make operational these sanctions and support measures for Ukraine. Alone or divided, I can't even imagine what Putin would have done to our continent. You have been up to this historic challenge. Let me go even further. When it comes to support measures for Ukraine, I believe giving the candidate status to Ukraine is important. Now, of course, it will take some time for the Ukraine to join the EU. There'll be a rigorous process, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that the Ukrainians are fighting for democracy. They are already part of our community. I think the status of candidate country would be a fair acknowledgement for this. We expect to see strong sanctions to really dry up all of the financial resources for Putin in this war. Technological embargoes, gas, oil, against the oligarchs as well, an end to the golden passports and residence rights, as you have mentioned, Madam President. All of these sanctions must be activated as soon as possible. We hope that this will not hit the Russian people too hard, as we know who are majoritarily opposed to this war. We need to welcome the Russian opposition here in this hemicycle as well. Now, these measures will have a cost for our economy, so we need to neutralise costs at a European level for the countries and companies who are hardest hit by this. Let me conclude with one final point, Mr. President, Madam President, to say that there is still some work to be done for Europe to guarantee its solidarity as shown by this crisis. Our journey towards strategic economy needs to include a review of the defence budget at national and European levels, as well as an energy autonomy strategy as well. Colleagues, the protection of our European model comes at a cost. My political group believes that our freedoms are a fundamental value. We are willing to assume that cost when it comes to sanctions or investment in tools of European sovereignty. We understand sacrifices of the European people and also the sacrifices of millions of Europeans before us who have made this the freest continent in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor on behalf of the Green Group to Philip Lamberts.
Dear Ukrainian friends, we do not have enough words to praise your courage and determination to defend your freedom. Your resistance is a wake-up call to all democrats around the world. Without the will to fight, democracy will perish. To your aggressor, I say, your lies for justifying war cannot and will not remain unchallenged. No, Mr. Putin, Ukraine is not ruled by Nazis. On the contrary, its legitimately elected president stems from a family who was blooded in the Holocaust. No, Mr. Putin, there's no genocide going on in the Donbass. What is happening there is a war that you yourself started 8 years ago, which took already 14,000 lives, and that your invasion brings only to a new level. No, Mr. Putin, Ukraine has never intended to get nuclear weapons. On the contrary, it relinquished voluntarily those it inherited in 1991 from the Soviet Union in exchange for its territorial integrity, which you have been trampling on ever since you annexed Crimea in 2014. No, Mr. Putin, there was no perspective for Ukraine to join NATO in the foreseeable future. And if there is such an aspiration in Ukraine, as there was in so many nations once subjugated by the Soviet Union, your aggression against Ukraine explains why. No, Mr. Putin, The NATO member states have no intention to deny the Russian people's right to peace and security. It is your reckless actions that imperil those legitimate aspirations. The reality, Mr. Putin, is that the people of Ukraine chose for freedom, for democracy, for rule of law, for peace. And that choice, made by a people so close to Russia by history and geography, was never a threat to Russia's security, but to the very existence of your authoritarian and kleptocratic rule. This is the real reason for the invasion, at the cost of precious human lives and livelihoods, both Ukrainian and Russian. The reality, Mr. Putin, is that your brutal aggression against the Ukrainian people is doomed to fail. You wanted to deny their very existence as a people. Your aggression in cementing their unity against the invader. As citizens of the European Union, we know that the war on Ukraine is more than just an aggression against a sovereign state. It is a direct challenge to the values that lie at the foundation of our union. Ever since it was started, the European project was and remains a peace project, so that the rule of brute force be replaced by the rule of law, so that democracy, dialogue, compromise and cooperation across national borders provide the best basis for shared and sustainable prosperity. We Europeans cannot stand by idle when a partner country is invaded and when our fundamental values are challenged in such a brutal way. This is why, short of direct military intervention, which would be foolish, we must and we will provide the Ukrainian people with all the support we can in order to face the aggression. This is why we must and we will provide safe haven without any discrimination to all those who are fleeing the war to seek refuge on our territory. This is why we must and we will mobilize all political, economic and financial means at our disposal to exert maximal pressure on Putin's Russia in order to make him stop his aggression. And let me be clear to the people of Russia, we have no quarrel with you. You too have the right to live in dignity, and many of you are standing up daily to defend it at great personal risk. We know that resuming the diplomatic dialogue with your country is the only path to a sustainable peace on our continent, but this can only happen if the aggression stops. As for us Europeans, meeting the challenge put to us by Putin's war will test our strength, our determination, and above all, our unity. It will not come cheap. Therefore, it will force us to make hard choices. The first must be for cohesion within and across member states. The global financial crisis, the Eurozone crisis and the pandemic have deepened social and economic injustice in our union. It cannot be that once again the brunt of the massive efforts required to counter Putin's war will be carried by the weakest shoulders. Should that be the case, the legitimate resentment would sap the very basis of our social contract as well as those of our union. And this would fulfill one of Putin's unset goals, dividing us. The second must be for energy independence. Indeed, our massive dependence on Russia for raw materials and energy is a primary reason for Europe's lack of determination to deter the Russian regime up until now. No surprise, when 40% of our gas, 30% of our coal, of our oil and of our nuclear fuels, don't forget that, is provided by Russia. As the EU is almost devoid of these resources, is our plan really to replace this massive dependence from Russia with another equally massive dependence from anyone else? We say that energy independence is the key for the EU to become a respected geopolitical player, and that will never be achieved by putting gas and nuclear at the heart of our energy strategy. As the President said, only renewables and energy efficiency can give us the strategic autonomy we seek. It is not just for the climate that we must accelerate the energy transition. It is for our security and for the resilience of our economies. Dear colleagues, never before has the European Union been challenged in such a direct and brutal way. I have no doubt that we collectively and only collectively have the strength, the resources, the determination, and above all, the wisdom to meet this challenge together with Ukraine, because we belong together. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor now to Marco Zanni on behalf of the ID Group.
Grazie mille, Presidente della Commissione Europea,
President of the European Commission, President of the Council, High Representative. The cowardly attack of the Russian regime is showing Europe once again the ugliest images of its history, as was recalled by President von der Leyen. 30 years since the war in the Balkans, once again in 2022, we're talking about a war in Europe. Our support and our extraordinary admiration goes to the Ukrainian people, these people who are tenaciously defending their freedom and their sovereignty when faced with an unacceptable attack. It's great to see unanimous criticism of the attack, and it's great to see that perhaps for the first time European Union institutions have firmly and rapidly responded to an emergency situation. Everyone's recalled the sanctions package that has been launched, and in terms of size, length and impact, it is unequalled in European history. The approach and the unity with which the European institutions have moved are unprecedented. Support for the Ukrainian people needs to be total, and we need to ensure that we have peace as soon as possible, a peace which restores the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But at the same time, as some of you have recalled, we also need to look at the fact that the 24th of February has changed our history. There's going to be a before the 24th of February and an after the 24th of February. And we have to look at what our errors and mistakes have been in the past, what has led to us being unprepared for a post-February the 24th period. Russia isn't the only authoritarian regime that is threatening the global order, and that's something we need to note. So let's try and look at these errors that we've made. We several times mentioned our dependence on Russia in terms of energy, gas, oil, raw materials. And they're also a market for our goods. But this dependency was our political choice. We chose not to use our own energy resources and to buy them from Russia or elsewhere instead. Europe is not a country, well, an area, excuse me, that is poor in energy resources. That's something we've chosen to be. And let me give you an example. In the 1990s in Italy, we were producing 20 billion cubic meters of gas a year. Today we produce 3, not because gas in Italy has run out, but because we've decided not to use it. And on sanctions, as we've said, this package is unprecedented. But we have to be clear, it's going to have an impact on our economy as well. And let me take up what our colleague Mr. Lamberts has said. We've had 2 years of pandemic, we've had an unprecedented economic crisis, and we can't have the consequences of these sanctions weighing on our businesses and on our citizens. So I hope that the Commission will act quickly once again to ensure that this doesn't happen, to ensure that our businesses and our citizens receive the appropriate support. Let me conclude just with a couple of comments. Firstly, what we've seen happen with Russia needs to be a lesson for the future. There's another non-liberal regime that's threatening the West, and that is China. Let's not make the same mistakes with China that we made with Russia. Let's reduce Europe's dependency on China. That is crucial. My second point is more personal in nature, and with this I will conclude. These are times of history in which politicians are split between the great and the less great. In my country we say men and small men. And once again I note that unfortunately at this time some people in this Parliament wanted to see themselves recalled as small men. They prevented my political group from fully supporting the resolution that we're going to be voting on. And this is something that is a small gesture that doesn't damage my political group, doesn't damage others. I think it damages this institution, which could have assumed a unanimous position. Thank you.
I give the floor next on behalf of the ECR group to Mr. Legutko.
Madam President, the war created an entirely new situation, and we have to do everything we can to win this war, because it's our war, the war of all European nations. Once Putin decided to go ahead with the invasion, it became clear he is determined to subdue Ukraine and will not hesitate to resort to the extreme measures. It was he who once said, let me remind you, that the collapse of the Soviet Union had been the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the century. So there should be no misunderstanding as to his intentions. He plans to create what was once the Soviet Empire, perhaps not with one stroke, but that is definitely his final objective. Moreover, he has been more or less open about it all along. The Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people are opposing the invaders, and they desperately need some military backup arms and other tools of defense. Fortunately, after the initial opposition from some countries, nowadays it is about 20 governments, I think, that started helping the Ukrainians. And it's very good that some time ago in the Council, the member states decided to create European Peace Facility, and that these funds can be now used to help Ukraine. And I'm proud to say that it is my government that was first to propose as early as Thursday morning to activate European Peace Facility. So the flow of arms, the flow of necessary technology and other means of defense must continue. Whatever the effects of the sanctions, who will win the war will be ultimately decided on the battlefield. And finally, I must say this. I'm sorry, I must say this, because as usual, the EU is, with its narcissistic and self-congratulatory proclivities, likes to escape responsibility. Putin made his decision because he was induced by the weakness of the West. Let us be frank. He did not think much of the Western leaders, and it showed. He didn't hide it. And in a way, he was right, having been for a long time pampered by the French and German governments, by some American administrations, also by the European Commission that was both unable and unwilling to stymie the Nord Stream projects. To those Western leaders and governments that took upon themselves the job of dealing with Russia, particularly to the German politicians, but not only to them, we must say today, ladies and gentlemen, you blew it, and your leadership credibility is gone. It's time for a reset, and let us start by enabling Ukraine to join the European Union.
I give the floor next to Manon Aubry on behalf of the Left Group.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Présidente de la Commission européenne,
Madam President of the European Commission, war has come back to Europe. I am part of the generation that was born after the Cold War that did not know this clash of the big powers. I have been told since childhood that Europe is peace. However, the ghosts of the past are coming back to haunt us. War is back. And let me say very clearly, Vladimir Putin is entirely responsible, and today he has blood on his hands. Our group firmly condemns the unacceptable military Russian aggression against Ukraine and would like to highlight the heroic resistance of the Ukrainians and their presidents in the face of this invasion. The tanks are rolling in, the bullets are raining down. Terrified civilians are trying to find shelter, whether in the underground or on the road to exile, and it's those people I'd like to think of first and foremost. The Ukrainians need to know that we are not going to abandon them. Let me say to President Zelensky that I very much thank him for taking the time today to speak to our parliament. Democracy and freedom, those things that his people are fighting for, these are our values too. They are the antithesis of Putin. We need to urgently send humanitarian assistance without any conditions. We need to take in refugees without any distinctions of the colour of skins, with no arguments. The humanitarian crisis is also geopolitical. Putin wants to take us into a world of chaos and brutality where the strongest prevail. And I say this very seriously. Colleagues, President von der Leyen, President Michel, we cannot accept to become part of this terrible game and for Europe to become a battlefield. I warn you, colleagues, against becoming involved in military one-upmanship and an arms race that would turn our continent into fire and blood. As Jean Jaurès rightly said, you cannot wage war to end war. The European Union must, however, defend at any cost the only really valid objective, and that is peace and de-escalation. Strong and targeted sanctions have been taken, but for some of them, how will they be truly applied when there is still impunity for tax havens which hide the wealth of Russian oligarchs? We need to tackle tax evasion and criminality at an international level. We should be clear, these economic sanctions can only last so long. The people will feel the consequences through price rises that will have to be compensated. We all know that the only really sustainable option is diplomacy. All of our efforts have to be focused on obtaining a ceasefire and seeing the withdrawal of Russian troops. The path to peace is difficult, but it is the only reasonable path we have. NATO, a military alliance, a legacy of the Cold War, is not the solution. NATO does not judge on world peace. That is the United Nations. The place to discuss the security of the continent is not NATO, it's the OSCE. The Ukrainian president has talked about ways to move forward. For example, a statute of neutrality protected by the United Nations. We should support this possibility. I don't want to lie to the citizens. There is no miracle solution. But I do have a very firm conviction. What we need to do to counter Putin is not to enter into a vicious cycle of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. What we need to see is the mobilization of people for peace.
In Russia, at Rostov-sur-le-Don, there was a young woman who was imprisoned for 8 days simply for standing in the street with a placard. And that is a symbol for the mobilization that Putin wants to try and make invisible. She symbolizes the courage of thousands of Russians who are defying the fierce repression of Putin. There are hundreds of thousands of Europeans who've taken the Ukrainian flag and gone onto the streets to call for peace, peace at any cost. And let me end with the words from Albert Camus on the 8th of August 1945, just after the bombing of Hiroshima. Looking at these terrifying perspectives for humanity, we see now that peace is the only fight that is really worth fighting for. It is more than a prayer. This is a call from the people to their governments. It is a choice between hell and between reason. Thank you very much.
Next, on behalf of the non-attached members, to Kinga Gall.
Madam President, Mr. High Representative, until last night, more than 90,000 refugees arrived to Hungary. This is the biggest humanitarian program in Hungary in history, and we are trying to help everybody who wants to come to Hungary. Everybody is welcome, everybody will be helped, irrespective of which part of Ukraine they are coming from and irrespective of their ethnicity. The entire country has been mobilized to help them. The military aggression, we fully condemn the military aggression against Ukraine. And we stand for the territorial integrity of Ukraine and the sovereignty of Ukraine. We are in favor of united European action, and we also are in favor of Ukraine's candidate status. And despite all the disinformation, we support all common sanctions, common decisions. Also, the European Peace Facility should be activated. We must not let ourselves be drawn into this tragic war just on the other side of the border. Ethnic minorities are even more vulnerable in war than in peace times. We must pay attention to the security of the ethnic Hungarian community in Transcarpathia. We need calm, we need wisdom, and we need the two parties to engage in talks again. We need to restore peace in the neighborhood, and we must help Ukraine in any way we can. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. Now the next speaker is Mrs. Juncker-Chetena.
Ukraine signed in their blood the EU membership. I myself must apologize to the Ukrainians and all others that I was too weak to convince my friends in the West in time that Putin is a major threat, and then the biggest provocation is not our NATO or EU memberships, but not being invited in joining NATO and the EU. But today there are no more Eastern or Western Europeans. There is only our joint responsibility for the European continent. I want to turn to the Russians. You also can stop the war criminal Putin. I understand that you yourselves are imprisoned and poisoned with lie. But join us nonetheless. The Ukrainians are dying for you also, for a free Russia. Some human being in the Kremlin must act too, to isolate this war criminal with a nuclear button in his hands. Those maps who went to the occupied Crimea must now go to Putin and stop him. Ukrainian blood binds you. We are witnessing the beginning of an end for Putin. When that end will come, I cannot tell you. I only know that we must do all that is in our power to bring it closer. Thank you, Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much.
Herrn Pedro Marques.
Now, Mr. Pedro Marques, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado, Presidente, Presidente da Comissão.
Thank you very much,
Presidente
Vice
Zelensky e
President, Madam
ucranianos.
President,
Uma agressão bárbara a um Estado
and High
livre e uma
Representative.
Europa que se une
Barbaric
contra o regresso
aggression
do mundo
against
à Guerra
a
Fria.
free country
Uma
in
guerra que
Europe.
já não é apenas
And
uma
of course,
miragem.
we're all
Há um povo
united.
que sofre
It
e um
reminds us
mundo
of
que
the
muda.
Cold War.
Sim,
This
armamos a
war
Ucrânia. Sim,
is not an
infligimos
illusion.
sanções sem paralelo
A
a
people
Putin
is suffering.
e aos oligarcas.
Yes, for the Ukraine, we have
Isolamos a
to
Rússia de
have
Putin do mundo livre.
unprecedented sanctions against Russia and his oligarchs.
E o exemplo dos
We
milhares
have
que
to
Putin
liberate
prendeu por
Ukraine
gritarem
from
pelo fim da
Putin.
guerra.
And we
Se
also
hoje
have to
somos
see
menos
that
livres devido a
Putin
esta guerra,
is
lutaremos com
trying
mais força
to
pela
kill
ambição do sonho
people. If
europeu
we
da liberdade.
don't react today,
Apoiaremos a Ucrânia.
then we won't
Enfrentaremos a crise
have
energética,
the
seremos finalmente
possibility
solidários com os
of
refugiados todos e
remaining
afirmaremos
united
sem mais
as a
demoras
union.
a
We
autonomia
have
da
to
Europa
work
no mundo.
and
Seremos mais
express our
fortes e
solidarity
unidos da crise
and
que nos queria
maintain
dividir.
our autonomy
E
in the world.
sonhamos
And
com o
we
regresso à
have
paz
to
para os nossos filhos,
leave this
para os
crisis
filhos da
unified.
brava Ucrânia.
We have
Slava Ucrânia.
to do this for the children and do this for the children of the brave and courageous Ukrainians.
Herr Kollege
Thank you very much.
Austrevicius.
Mr. Autrevicius is next.
Mr. Chair, Madam President, High Commissioner, dear colleagues, dear Ukrainians, today we are back to 28 in the European Union again. Ukraine has emerged as a great member of the European family. Ukraine is bravely fighting for European values and freedom for Europeans. Let us give Ukraine its due, providing a candidate status now and then accepting it in the European Union. Every day that passes makes things worse for Ukraine, and we cannot allow it. Today, the future and the fate of Europe is at stake in Ukraine. Russia's treacherous operation only confirms the Putin's regime's choice to draw new red lines on the face of Europe. By ordering the attack on Ukraine, the Russian leader, Putin, has become a war criminal and has brought the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko with him. They are already in the dustbin of history. Their actions are already condemned and soon to be convicted. Let us give Ukraine a weapon with which it can defend itself against the aggressor. It's our duty. And let us provide humanitarian aid to its people who are suffering from the crimes of its aggressor. The support must be such that the West can look Ukraine in the eye. Let us isolate Russia, the full political, economic, and cultural blockade. Keep Russia down, Kremlin cronies out, and the Russian people close. Ukraine's victory is our victory. Slava Ukraini!
Unser nächster Redner ist Herr
Next
Sergej
speaker,
Lagodinsky.
Mr. Sergej Lagodinsky.
Slava Ukraini! We did not ask for this confrontation. Ukrainians did not ask for this confrontation. Ukrainians didn't spread hate. Ukrainians didn't dream of empires. Ukrainians did not dictate their neighbors what policies to follow and which alliances to join. Ukrainians did not occupy, did not annex, and did not blackmail. Those actions came from Moscow. And my heart is bleeding when I say those words. But Ukrainians, all they want is to live a free life in a free country. This is not much to ask, but this is a lot to defend. And this is why it is our European moral imperative to help Ukrainians with refuge and money, but yes, also with military equipment, to help them defend their own choice, to help them save their children, their families, their loved ones, the loved ones who take arms and walk to battles, help them to return. And yes, this is why we have no other options than to put a clear alternative in front of President Putin. Either you stop this war now, or you will have to bear the consequences that will be devastating. We did not ask for this confrontation. You did.
Kollege Kofo, you are the next
Mr.
one.
Kofo, next speaker. Thank you very much, Vice President. Russia has to be hit by the hardest sanctions. We have to send weapons to Ukraine. We have to send money. We have to send humanitarian aid. And we have to receive those poor people who are forced to flee Ukraine, who are now arriving in our home. We have to say no to Putin's regime, and we have to demonstrate that the aggression that Putin has demonstrated towards a peaceful neighbor is unacceptable, that this action we will respond with serious consequences, and the Kremlin's terror will never be tolerated by the free world. The free world can only be on the side of Ukraine. I love Europe because of its diversity. And Ukraine is part of Europe. The people who are fleeing from Ukraine, they are Europeans, and they are part of our European family. The Ukrainians are being attacked by Putin, and so therefore we should demonstrate our friendship and help. Dictatorship can never succeed, and Putin will never have enough. Right now, it's impacting Ukraine. In the future, it could be affecting other European countries. We have to say stop. We have to stand up, and we have to be alert and ensure every country's right to determine on its own destiny. We have to be prepared to defend ourselves against any tyrant who will attack us with terror and war. We need strength in NATO, and we need larger defense budgets. I support this resolution. Thank you very much.
Danke.
Thank you very much. After the cleaning is Mr. Fitta.
Grazie Presidente, Presidente della Commissione.
Thank you, President,
Una
President
tragedia
of the Commission.
ingiustificabile sta
This
colpendo il nostro
is
continente.
an unacceptable
Quello che
tragedy.
sta accadendo sotto i nostri
What's
occhi a
happening in
pochi
our
chilometri dai
continent,
nostri
in front
confini,
of our eyes,
è
just
un
a few
attacco
kilometers away from our
condotto dalla
borders,
Federazione
is
Russa
an
a tutto
attack being
campo
carried
contro
out
la
from the Russian
sovranità e l'integrità
Federation
territoriale di un paese democratico.
on the territorial
Le immagini che ci
integrity and
giungono
sovereignty
dall'Ucraina
of a democratic
testimoniano non
country. The
solo un
images
attacco
that come from
ingiustificato
Ukraine
e
show
indiscriminato, ma la
that the
palese
attack is
violazione di
indiscriminate
tutte
and
le regole del
unacceptable,
diritto
but
internazionale,
also
comprese quelle che
show
regolano
clear
i conflitti.
violations of
Bisogna
international
reagire
law.
per mettere fine
We
a
need
queste
to
azioni mirate
act
contro
to
obiettivi
put an
civili,
end
donne e
to
bambini,
these
che non
actions which are aimed
rappresentano una
at
guerra vera e
women
propria,
and children,
ma
civilian
una barbarie,
populations.
i cui
This is not
responsabili
war,
dovranno
this
essere
is
chiamati in causa nelle sedi
barbaric,
competenti.
and those who are
Barbarie alla
responsible
quale il popolo
need to
ucraino,
be
cui
judged for their
esprimiamo la
actions.
nostra piena
These are
solidarietà
barbaric
e
actions
vicinanza,
against the
sta
the
seguendo e
Ukrainian,
reagendo con
people.
coraggio, dignità
We
e con
salute
grande spirito
their
di
bravery and
Così
their
come
resilience.
penso che oggi sia opportuno
I think
sottolineare
it's
quello
important
che è
today to
l'azione, il
emphasize
ruolo
that
dei paesi del confine
actions
orientale, i quali stanno
and
svolgendo
role
un'azione
of the
nell'accoglienza e nella
countries
gestione dell'emergenza umanitaria
on
che è
Ukraine's western
encomiabile.
border
Una reazione quella
are
ucraina
crucial.
forse per
They're
molti
carrying out
inaspettata
very
e che
important
richiede da parte
humanitarian
nostra,
work.
in cooperazione con altri
We
paesi
need
dell'Alleanza
to work
Atlantica
together
e della
with
comunità
NATO and
internazionale un
other
impegno ancora
countries
maggiore per
across the
difendere
globe
i valori
in
di
order to
libertà e
defend the
democrazia.
values of
Ed è per
freedom
questo
and
che
democracy.
l'Unione Europea e
And
l'Occidente
it's
hanno
because of that
sicuramente
that the
compiuto
European
nel
Union
passato
and the West,
alcuni errori, ma oggi è il momento dell'unità e
who
della
have made
fermezza.
mistakes in the past need to stand firm, and together today our group fully supports the sanctions and any actions that will strike at Moscow's military and economic power. We want to see Moscow forced to end this shameful conflict in Ukraine. We also need to be aware that in preserving political unity, we need to work hard to ensure that public opinion is with us, and the people of Europe are going to suffer, given that this is coming on top of the pandemic and economic crisis. So we need a fund to provide funds to citizens who are struck by these sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Villanueva Ruiz.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President. Let me say that we firmly condemn the invasion by Putin, and we want to show maximum solidarity to the victims in Ukraine in these very difficult times. It's also important to remember that today there are extreme right groups in this chamber who are allies of Putin and who have helped finance and work for the destabilization of Europe, and this is not something we can continue to hide. Europe needs to act firmly and with the objective of building peace. The priority has to be to stem the loss of human lives. This conflict cannot be used to further other interests. We need to foster spaces of international dialogue. We need to use all the tools we have at our disposal to promote that dialogue. We know that that is the only way to end this terrible tragedy. Let us not repeat old errors and see military escalation, which will lead to years of pain. This is the moment to be involved in politics and show that Europe is up to this challenge. Peace is the only objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much indeed. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Castaldo.
Thank you, Chair. Today, we are not simply condemning an unjustifiable aggression. Today, we stand up united in this House to face the criminal invasion of an authoritarian regime against international law, our principles, our values, therefore against all of us. Putin's cynical bet assumes he would quickly overthrow the Ukrainian democracy with his divisions on the ground, but also brings other divisions, no less dangerous, through propaganda and fear within our countries among our peoples. Our bounden duty is to make sure that it will fail, with our resolute support to the heroic resistance in Ukraine and its official recognition as EU candidates, and with the immediate adoption of a new solidarity package based on common European bonds. We must immediately support also our companies and families who will suffer the dire consequences of the dutiful sets of sanctions aimed at bringing Moscow to the negotiating table. This is not the war of all the Russians. This is a crime perpetrated by a tyrant and his accomplices. Thousands of citizens are bravely taking to the streets to shout their clear no, risking their lives to oppose his imperialistic ravings. They deserve our full support. This existential threat is a crucial moment in our history and calls for exceptional efforts if we really want to protect peace, democracy and our common destiny. Sometimes it takes courage to grow up and become who we really are. Slava Europa, Slava Ukraina.
Thank you much indeed. Mr. Gala, please.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, szanowni ukraińscy Druzy, Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini.
Was sich hier vor unseren Augen abspielt, ist
What's happening is war in Europe in real time. Suffering innocent people is the biggest catastrophe for Ukraine since 1941 when Germany invaded, and the only responsible is a cynical, lying dictator who rejects the existence of Ukraine as an independent state and wants to bring his people back into the empire. This must fail. 1948, beginning of the Berlin blockade. Ernst Reuter, then Berlin mayor, spoke to the world and he said, revisionist Russia is trying to do the same thing now in Ukraine, to put Ukrainian people into their guardianship. Peoples of the world, in America, in Europe, in the free world, look at that city, look at that country, and understand that that country, that people cannot be left behind. This people and has said where it wants to be, we need to give that people a political signal that they belong to us, that their fight for freedom isn't in vain, that this evil, this Stalinist, fascist Putin regime will not be victorious. And after all of this is over, they can start reconstruction on a path to Europe. So I would ask for your approval of this resolution. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Herr Gahler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gahler. Next we have Mr. Piccola.
Thank you. Yes, the aggression of Russia against Ukraine can be the beginning of the end of humankind, but it could also be the beginning of a new world order. The main reason for the war is the authoritarian rule of Putin. Which is worse, Putin's aggression or his narrative justifying violence? Putin counted on Ukraine's passiveness and the division of the West, but he overestimated his strength and underestimated the Ukrainian resilience and the ability of the West to come together. This war reminds me of the military aggression against my country, Croatia, 30 years ago. Attacks on children, civilian buildings, destruction and refugees. Just as Milosevic did, Putin must answer for his actions before the International Criminal Court. Putin will find it difficult to come out of this war. Kremlin might experience the Russian version of the Maidan. History has shown that dictators can be vanquished, but it is equally important to eliminate the circumstances leading to their rule. Ukraine will bleed, but Putin's Russia will bleed out. Glory to Ukraine and Slava Ukraini.
Next we have Nathalie Loiseau.
Il a fallu une guerre.
It took a war.
Il a fallu une guerre sur le
It
sol
took a
européen
war on
pour que
European
l'Europe
soil
apprenne à
for
parler le
Europe to learn to
langage de la
speak the language of
puissance.
power.
Il a fallu
It
Vladimir
took
Poutine
Vladimir Putin
et sa guerre de trop
and his
pour
war
que
too
le lien
far
transatlantique
for
se
the
resserre,
transatlantic
que
ties
l'OTAN
to
se
retighten,
réveille et que la
NATO to
défense
wake up, and for
européenne
European
naisse
defence
enfin.
finally to emerge.
Mais il a surtout fallu
But it took
l'extraordinaire
above all
courage
the extraordinary
de
courage
Volodymyr
of
Zelensky
Volodymyr
et du peuple
Zelensky
ukrainien
and the Ukrainian
pour que
people
nous nous
for
sentions
us
enfin
finally
obligés
to feel obliged
d'essayer d'être
to
à
try
la hauteur.
to rise to the occasion.
Ne nous leurrons pas.
Let's not
La
fool
crise sera
ourselves. The
longue et
crisis
elle
will be
sera
a long
dure.
one and it will be tough.
Nous allons devoir
We
tenir,
will have to hold strong,
assumer le
to pay
prix
the
de nos
price of our
décisions
decisions,
et
and
surtout
above
aller
all,
plus
to go
loin dans
further
le
in
renforcement de
strengthening
notre union.
our union.
À Maïdan en
At the
2014,
Maidan
c'est
in
le drapeau
2014, it was the
européen que
European
les
flag
Ukrainiens
that was
brandissaient
flourished by
pour
the
réclamer la
Ukrainians
fin
to
de
call
la
for the
tutelle
end
de
of
Moscou.
Moscow's dominion.
Aujourd'hui, dans les abris où
Today,
ils se
in
réfugient contre
shelters
les bombes,
where they
on voit encore
seek shelter
des
from the
drapeaux
bombs, the
européens.
European flags can still be
C'est
seen.
vers nous que
We are the
l'Ukraine
ones
regarde.
the Ukrainians are
Nous
looking
devons
to.
prouver aux
We
Ukrainiens
must prove to the
qu'ils ont
Ukrainians
raison
that they are
de
right
croire
to
en
believe in us.
nous. Nous devons aimer l'Europe
We must love Europe
autant qu'ils l'aiment.
as much
Slava
as they
Ukraini.
love it. Slava Ukraini.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much indeed.
Vizepräsidentin Heidi Hautala.
Vice President Heidi Hautala, please.
Arvoisa puheenjohtaja,
Venäjän hyökkäys Ukrainaa vastaan on saanut EUn viimein näyttämään sellaista yhtenäisyyttä ja globaalia johtajuutta, jota siltä on kauan odotettu.
That we have shown our unity and that we've shown global leadership. That's what we've needed. I think we've been able to show that our strength now has been brought to bear to support Ukraine. Sauli Niinistö, the Finnish president, said that the masks now have fallen. All we see now is the face of war. What we see now is a very difficult development that we've seen happening over many, many years. We'll need to therefore work as the EU, as member states, and help our neighbours. We can't, in Finland, in a non-aligned member state, we were frozen, if you will, but now we're actually seeing possible that we might be in the same situation. Countries that put themselves in Russia's way, this happens to them. So we would line out to look for NATO. Thank you much indeed, Ms. Bardella.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. President.
Negotiations
were underway more than ever that Vladimir Putin took an unacceptable step, putting Europe under the scourge of war. The sovereignty of a people and country was violated. So solidarity with the people of Ukraine, they've entered into a resistance to defend their homeland. But the tragic lessons of history must not cloud our vision. We need to look at the complexities as we seek peace and de-escalation. For 20 years now, we've been moving in a direction that has taken us under the American flag, and we have an imbalance in our relationship with Russia. Our own freedom to act has been sacrificed to an illusion and an archaic conflict. We need to be firm, and we need to be unambiguous in our unity and our support for the people of Ukraine and our condemnation of this invasion. It is nonetheless dishonest for the EU institutions to make use of this to take a vision of federalism forward that the people of Europe reject. NATO, an expansion of the EU, won't help in any way. The priority is to stop the arms. Russia should not come back to face the kind of sanctions which have not helped. Undermining the purchasing power of the people who are already suffering doesn't help with the strategic autonomy. And the sanctions which have been in place since 2014 have been in this case. We should not carry on using methods which we condemn elsewhere in Europe. Mature democracies such as ours shouldn't be closing down media stations, even if they're under foreign influence. It is also no point of fanning the flames of war. We need to seek peace and de-escalation, and we also need to return to a free, independent, respected France, which is able to operate in a balance in a multipolar world.
Frau Kollegin Anna Fotyga.
Anna Fotyga, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President. I salute heroism and resistance of Ukrainian people facing the unprecedented aggression from the Kremlin, Putin's Russian Federation. I really admire heroism of Ukrainian leadership. President Zelensky already finds his place in universal history. I admire heroism of commanders, soldiers, and in particular, ordinary people. You are invincible. It is our war as well, and in resisting aggression, you are the best part of us, the West. We are honored by your request to become a member of the European Union. We'll do our utmost to provide you candidacy status as soon as possible and immediately. On unprecedented rules, the membership, therefore, because we need you, and of course you need us. In this, I speak on behalf of entire ECR, Polish delegation. All of them fully support the resolution as negotiated by me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Pineda Mano.
Thank you, President. We condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No nuances. Not 8 years since Donbass. We've seen impunity of the various assassinations by these gangs of Nazis. The Minsk agreements haven't been adhered to, but nothing can justify this attack. We're against war, and that's why we cannot support this resolution calling to arms, and which says that it's a guarantee of peace, and refers to an instrument of war, which is NATO. And the sanctions against the civil population, well, never in the whole history of conflicts have sanctions helped anything. A fund to support peace cannot be used to buy weapons. We defend diplomacy, politics as the only way of resolving the conflict. We defend the sending of humanitarian aid and opening the borders for those refugees from that war. Our Secretary General, Julio Anguita, said, "May wars be damned and the swines that support them." Thank you. Kostas Papadakis is next, please.
Our condemnation of the capitalist aggression of Russia combines with the condemnation of the war crimes of the US, NATO and the European Union against the peoples of Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria and Libya. The imperialist competition for spheres and influence and natural resources led to the capitalist war, which is paid with human lives and poverty. All this 30 years after the capitalist restoration of the Soviet Union, that socialism made it for people to live in equity for decades. Now, armaments are paid by the people, and this leads to escalation of the imperialist war, with the deep intervention of Greece through NATO bases. Peoples do not choose sides. No intervention, no involvement in the war, no armies outside national borders, decoupling from the EU and NATO. People in power.
Thank you. Andrius Kubilius, you have the floor.
Dear brothers and sisters in Ukraine, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to praise the heroism of Ukrainian people. I would like to praise the heroism of Ukrainian soldiers and the heroic leadership of President Vladimir Zelensky. Ukrainians are facing and defending themselves against the war launched by a real new Nazi regime in Kremlin. Putin is a real war criminal. Ukrainians are suffering because we in the West till now were too weak to stop Putin crimes from the very beginning. Ukrainians with their blood are fighting for their right to reunite with Europe. They are more Europeans than many of us. That is why we need to give them candidate status immediately, and then we need to design special fast procedure for Ukraine to join us. There is an example of such a special procedure when in 1990 Eastern Germany integrated into European Union, and it took less than 1 year. So let's establish a special procedure also for Ukraine's swift reunification with Europe. After EU started to deliver weapons to Ukraine, when SWIFT and other banking sanctions were introduced, we need next steps. First of all, we need to stop imports of Russian oil and gas immediately. Each day, we are paying to Putin for 100 new T-72 tanks, twice more than Ukrainians are able to destroy during one day on the battlefield. Second, let's create a multi-billion Free Ukraine Fund to support resilience, reconstruction and modernization of Ukrainian economy. Let's finance it in the same way as we finance Next Generation EU Fund with EU borrowing in the markets. Thanks, Josep Borrell, for a good idea. Third, let's introduce full-scale SWIFT and other sanctions also against criminal Lukashenko and his banks. And the last point, stable peace on the European continent will be possible only if deputinization of Russia will happen. With the help of Ukrainian victories on the battlefields, with our sanctions, and with the help of ordinary Russians protesting on the streets, deputinization of Russia is coming closer and closer. Mr. Putin, you lost this criminal war. International Tribunal in Hague is waiting for you, for justice to be served. Justice, first of all, to Ukrainians. Razom do перемоги. Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Herr Kubilius.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. Mr. Sven Mikser, please.
Colleagues, I am proud at how strong and united we are today, but we have to be honest. We have been painfully slow and painfully late waking up to the true nature of Putin's Russia. I hope that today we finally truly understand the urgency and the existential nature of the current situation. If we do, it is imperative that we support Ukraine in every way possible without holding anything back. This includes lethal defensive equipment, economic and humanitarian aid, help to the refugees, and yes, also launching an honest and accession process for Ukraine to join our union. Regarding sanctions on Russia, for as long as the criminal ideology of Putinism remains in power in Russia, we have to go beyond punishing individuals and take the strategic decision of systemically weakening Russia's economy and industrial base. This is in our vital security interest. Yes, sanctions hit ordinary Russians too, and they are not our enemies. But let's admit it, it is primarily the responsibility of the Russian people to make sure that their mad Tsar cannot kill innocent people abroad. We should fully expect, and when possible, encourage the Russian people to take that responsibility seriously. Slava Ukraini.
Next we have Malik Asman.
Thank you, President. The courageous Ukrainian people are standing up to an evil act of aggression. Europe answers Ukraine's call for help. We rise up to defend those who are fighting for freedom and democracy. The EU is showing unity, and we are finally showing that we are not just a soft power. We are crippling Russia's economy, isolating Putin's regime, and reinforcing Ukraine's defense. But this is just the start, and we have to do more by excluding more Russian operators and banks from SWIFT, by blocking the Russian Central Bank's use of Western currencies. And we should even consider blocking Russian ships in our harbors, and more. Also, we have to increase our support for Ukraine's economy and defense with money and weapons. My message to the Ukrainian people: Europe stands with you. Slava Ukraini.
Danke.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yannick Jadot, please.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, en ce moment même, dans les rues, dans les maisons, les Ukrainiens défendent héroïquement la liberté, ils défendent leur démocratie, ils défendent leur intégrité territoriale. Ils sont pour l'Europe entière le front pour la sécurité, pour la paix et pour la démocratie sur notre continent. Alors oui, sanctionnons massivement Poutine et les oligarques
and the oligarchs and immediately incorporate Belarus into those sanctions. Yes, of course, let us militarily support the resistance in Ukraine. Yes, let's recognise the candidate status for the European Union of Ukraine, and let's exclude Russia from the entire international community and launch a major investment plan for climate and energy security to create renewable energies at the heart of the plan, because they are the energy of peace. And let's get out of the political complicity that is killing democracy and killing the climate. Let's act now, let's be proud of Europe alongside the resistance, the heroic resistance of Ukraine. Slava Vilnia, Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Urig, you have the floor.
Dear direction of the European Union colleagues, before I will say a couple of words about Ukraine, I would like to ask you a couple of honest questions. Where were international sanctions when the United States killed 200,000 civilians in Iraq under the pretext of weapons of mass destruction? Where were your resolutions when the US, completely against the international law, bombed Yugoslavia, Libya or Syria? Where was Europe when Ukrainian mercenaries were killing children in Donbass or were burning civilians in Odessa? I hope that the actions of the last days are teaching us that all wars are bad. All wars are bad, not only the wars of the Russian Federation, but also the wars of the United States of America. We have to condemn all wars. What's happening in Ukraine is horrible, and it has to stop. It has to stop. But the hypocrisy of some of you colleagues who ignore wars only because they are American, that's also hypocrisy. It's terrible.
Next. Arnaud Danjean is the next speaker. Colleagues, the events we've seen affecting all of the rules in such a brutal fashion, against all rational thought. We've seen deliberate aggression, brutal aggression against a free, sovereign European nation. And Vladimir Putin is the only one to be blamed. By doing that, he underestimated what the Ukrainians could do. He underestimated how they felt about their independence. That's what all autocrats think. He underestimated the reactions from Europe. Ukrainian resistance is admirable, and it needs our 100% support. We're very happy that Europe has taken its responsibility, shouldered its responsibility, but this satisfaction, working in unity, that shouldn't affect our lucidity. This terrible war will last. The aggressor may actually win militarily, even though it has a lack of morality. Let's not forget either that given there is war in Europe, and we've had wars since 1945 in Europe, we've seen already that Europe believes that it's ready to deal with these wars. Since 1991, we saw a decade of terrible wars in the Balkans. Now we are moving to the Ukrainian theatre. It is protecting more than just its status as an independent state. It's trying to, we have to make sure that we maintain our strategic awakening. We have to deal with the situation that others are imposing on us. This is an existential threat. Thank you.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you much indeed. Next, Mr. Benifei. Thank you, President. There is no greatness where there is no truth. These are the words of Leo Tolstoy, as quoted by David Sassoli a few months ago, addressing Putin. And we need the truth again today to achieve peace. The truth of the Ukrainian people who've shown heroic resistance together with President Zelensky. The truth of a Europe which is finally fighting for its own political energy and defence, sovereignty, and which is not afraid to speak out and to make sacrifices, to speak with one voice to stop war and save human lives, because victims come first, dead Ukrainians come first, the refugees we have to welcome, and those brave Russians who are sick of this military folly also come first. All people should be free, including Ukraine, to make their own decisions, make their own choices, without others trying to take decisions on their behalf. So we give full support today to the defence of our own democracy on Ukrainian soil. But we should be even braver than that. We should be there. Our governments, the EU institutions should take delegations to Kyiv to talk, to call for a ceasefire and to support the negotiations. Putin must stop, and then it will be all too clear to his own citizens too that both he and this inhuman war are mad. Long live free Ukraine. Long live free Europe.
Grazie.
Thank you much. Grazie. Mr. Getter, please.
Vous avez perdu, Monsieur Poutine.
Putin,
Oh, bien sûr, vous allez encore tuer, détruire, semer le deuil et le malheur, mais vous avez déjà perdu. Car on ne reconstruit pas les empires, croyez-en un Français, et ne revient pas cet absolutisme dont vous rêvez tant, croyez-en toujours un Français. Vous avez perdu, Monsieur Poutine, car l'Ukraine résiste héroïquement, magnifiquement, et résistera jusqu'à sa juste victoire. Vous avez perdu car vous avez resserré comme jamais les rangs de notre Union, qui prend ce jour même, ici même, les traits tant espérés d'une union politique. Vous avez perdu car vous avez rapproché les deux rives de l'Atlantique et vous avez perdu, Monsieur Poutine, parce que votre peuple ne vous croit plus et n'admet pas que vous alliez massacrer ses cousins ukrainiens. Vous n'êtes pas qu'un criminel de guerre, Monsieur Poutine. Vous êtes aussi une absolue nuisance pour votre pays lui-même que vous menez dans le mur contre son gré. Vive la paix, vive l'Ukraine, vive la liberté, Monsieur Poutine.
Mr. Putin.
No. Yes. Thank you very much. Bevor wir die Aussprache fortsetzen,
before continuing the debate,
gebe ich nun die Ergebnisse
I'm
der
now going
ersten
to give the
Abstimmungsrunde
results of the first
des ersten
round
Tages
of
bekannt.
voting
Ich bitte den Herrn
from
Kollegen,
the
der der
day.
nächste Redner ist, Verständnis
Please
dafür.
show the understanding of that to the next speakers. So the results of the voting round are as follows.
Abstimmung über die
On the
Änderungsanträge Russlands
amendments
Aggression
on
gegen
Russia's
die
aggression
Ukraine,
against Ukraine,
Absatz 1 angenommen.
paragraph 1 adopted,
Absatz 2
paragraph 2
angenommen.
adopted,
Absatz 3
paragraph 3
Änderungsantrag 4 abgelehnt.
amendment 4 rejected,
Absatz 3 angenommen.
paragraph
Änderung
3
5 angenommen.
accepted, amendment 5
Die Änderungen
accepted,
6, 22, 23 und 24 wurden abgelehnt.
22, 23, 24 rejected, amendment 7 adopted, 29 part 1 adopted, 29.2 rejected, amendments 29 part 3 adopted, paragraph 15 part 1 and part 2 and part 3 and part 4 adopted.
Der Änderungsantrag 8 wurde
Amendment
angenommen.
8 adopted.
Zu Absatz 16
Paragraph
sind
16,
die Änderungsanträge Teil 1,
amendments
2,
part 1,
3,
2,
4 und
3,
5
4 and
hinfällig.
5 fall.
Absatz 17
Paragraph
angenommen.
17 adopted.
Nach Absatz 17 sind
After
die Änderungsanträge
paragraph
13, 14,
17,
15,
amendments 13, 14,
16,
15, 16,
13
17
und 14 angenommen. Die Änderungsanträge
adopted.
15, 16 und 17
15,
abgelehnt.
16 and 17
Absatz
rejected.
18
Paragraph
Teil 1
18 part
und Teil
1,
2
part 2
angenommen.
adopted. Paragraph 19, Amendment 9, rejected. 19, Amendment 12 and 1925, adopted. On paragraph 19, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, they fall. Paragraph 20, part 1, adopted. Paragraph 20, part 2, adopted. 21, amendments on part 1, 2, 3, 4, adopted. Paragraph 22, part 1 and part 2, adopted. On 23, 1, 2 and 3 and amendment part 3 also adopted. On 24, 11 is adopted. On 24, part 1 and part 2, they fall. 25, adopted. 27, adopted. Paragraph 28, parts 1, 2, 3, adopted. Paragraph 29, parts 1 and 2, adopted. Paragraph 31, Amendment 26 is rejected. On 31, part 1 and part 2 are adopted. 34, Amendment 27, rejected. 34, part 1 and part 2, adopted. 35, parts 1, 2 and 3, adopted. Paragraph 36, Amendments 19 and 18 are rejected. After 37, Amendment 21, adopted. Paragraph 39, adopted. Paragraph 40, parts 1 and 2, adopted. After 43, Amendment 10, adopted. After paragraph 44, Amendment 20, rejected. After paragraph 45, Amendment 28, adopted. Recital C, part 1, 2, 3 and 4, adopted. After recital D, Amendment 1, rejected. Amendment 2, adopted. After E, Amendment 3, rejected. Recital F, part 1 and part 2, adopted. Recital G, parts 1 and 2, adopted. We shall now continue with our debate, and I'd like to ask our colleague Miroslav Radakovsky to come up to the lectern, please.
Also condemns the unjustified Russian invasion in Ukraine and calls for immediate stop of this aggression. Slovak Republic has offered the Russian and Ukrainian representatives as Bratislava for peace talks. Slovak Republic does not agree with the new independent countries. So Slovakia does not also prove the Kosovo status, because this was also with the help of foreign troops. I believe that in the near future there will be peace between two Slavic brothers, Ukraine and Russia, and we will do everything so that it will be this way. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to our colleague, Mr. Halicki.
Szanowni Państwo, zabite dzieci, kobiety, zniszczone miasta.
Children have been killed, women have been killed, towns have been destroyed. People there fighting for us, for freedom, for their freedom, but also for our values, European values, democracy. They're fighting for us, for Polish people, for Lithuanians, for you, ladies and gentlemen, in Western Europe, for all Europe to be able to enjoy security. They need weapons, that's obvious. But we can give them a lot more than weapons. We can give them a guarantee that once, thanks to those weapons, they've reconquered their freedom, they can live in peace in our family, in this European family. And that should be happening as soon as possible. Without looking at the procedure, we will find a way of implementing that dream. But let's be careful as well. Let's not make mistakes. If we want to suspend Nord Stream 2, why not suspend Nord Stream 1? We need to cut the head off Mr. Putin's mafia. We need to make sure they have no revenue. They should be there in The Hague International Tribunal for war crimes. And we should put our hand out today to everybody dreaming of peace. That's the sort of Europe we want. Europe living united and in peace. And anybody against that is working for Putin. Didn't start yesterday, this war in Ukraine. In 2008, let me just remind you, Russia attacked Georgia and Moldova, Transnistria. Blood was shed then as well. So we have to be supporting those in Russia who are fighting for peace. For Mr. Navalny. Long live free and democratic Ukraine.
Thank you. Mr. Jenskaya, you are the next one.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President.
I'm
grateful for this special sitting because it provides an opportunity to express what the political message of the day must be. We condemn the breach of international law committed by Putin ordering the invasion of a peaceful neighbouring country, and that's the resolution that we tabled as yesterday and we emphatically supported. Scholz is right, this is Putin's war, and we are protesting against him, not the Russian people. Our thoughts are with those people in Ukraine now who are fighting for their freedom, who are losing their lives, and who are fleeing to save their lives. Slava Ukraini. The EU and its institutions in this opportunity have shown that they can rise to the occasion, and there is an unprecedented resolve that they have demonstrated. The EU foreign policy therefore works only when member states want it. The sanctions are hitting hard. Many European politicians warned Putin about how costly an attack on Ukraine would prove, and that is being borne out now. Support for the refugees is continuing, and we are showing solidarity with countries on the western border of Ukraine who are providing the first assistance. They are not standing alone. Our help for Ukraine and neighbouring countries requires us to develop our policies further. How do we create security in a multipolar world? That question is one asked of us brutally by President Putin. We must find an answer.
Danke, Herr Kollege.
Thank you, colleague.
Am Wort ist
And
Frau
the
Hilde
next
Wautmann.
speaker is Mrs. Hilde Falklands.
Meneer de hoge vertegenwoordiger, collega's.
High Representative, colleagues.
Putin heeft het tegenovergestelde gekregen van wat hij wou.
Putin has got what he wanted. More NATO, more European unity, more Western determination. And he really wants a dirty war, Putin, against the West, and now he's threatening with nuclear weapons. Everything is irrational. He's a warmonger. But let us not forget, colleagues, autocrats throughout the world are looking at what's happening, how we are going to protect our values. How they're looking at our reaction today, and that will decide which world we live in tomorrow. 24th of February, the world changed. Let's make sure that in this crisis we see a new Europe born, a strong European defence, a strong European army to defend our values, where we work together, we have a common asylum policy to be able to deal with the refugees from Ukraine. a Europe that is no longer dependent on Russia for the supply of its fuel. A Europe with European Solidarity Fund for all Europeans who are affected by Putin's war. That is the Europe that we need now. Long live freedom, long live Europe, Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you. And the next speaker is the chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee of this Parliament, Mr. David McAllister.
Mr. President, thank you. The Russian military aggression and invasion against Ukraine is illegal, it is unprovoked, it is unjustified.